Hey everyone, this is Gary Smith. Welcome to my channel where I talk about the importance of purpose as it relates to your career, your finances, and your life. Today I'm honored to have a really special conversation with another entrepreneur and coach, Dr. Tracy Timberlake. This is perhaps the most amazing recording I've ever done because Tracy and I get into a subject that I think is very critical, and that is, how does our faith inform the work that we do? Stay tuned. Hey everybody, welcome to another podcast. I'm excited to have you here today. Today, my special guest is Dr. Tracy Timberlake. Tracy's an award-winning business coach and digital strategist. And her hope and vision for millions of entrepreneurs, leaders, and influencers is to understand the massive impact they can have by showing up fully in the digital space and to give them the tools and empower them to do just that. So, Tracy, thanks so much for taking time to be with me today. It's just great to get an opportunity to chat with you.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. I love having these conversations and I'm just honored to be able to be here. So thank you for the invitation.
Oh, we're going to have some fun today, and I'm sure we're going to create some content that'll be valuable to both of our listeners. But, you know, when you and I first talked, it's probably got to be somewhere between a month and 2 months ago. I was absolutely fascinated by your story and all of the different sort of puzzle pieces that have come together to bring you where you are in life. And I think just that by itself could be tremendously encouraging to people. So if you would, you know, take a few minutes and just sort of walk us through your walk as to how you got to where you are today.
Right. Okay. Well, gosh, where to begin? So I will say that I grew up very, middle-class family, working, all of that stuff. My dad was a career military man. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. And so I followed a very traditional, I would say, career path in terms of going to school and then going to college, getting a degree. And I loved all of it, by the way. Like I regret nothing. I always tell people, like, even though I'm an entrepreneur now, I don't actually regret any of my past. I loved every season. I think there is a trajectory that people believe that you should take. And so I followed it, with the degree and then the corporate. And I found that really didn't work so well for me, or it didn't feel as purposeful. And so I moved into ministry and nonprofit work, which was also very fulfilling, but still felt like that was not it. And then I started to work in higher education. Now, in this time frame, about 10, 12 years ago, the social media craze started to begin. Mm-hmm. And I started what was then just a very small little YouTube channel as an outlet for myself to talk about things that I liked. YouTube wasn't really used for educational content. It was really just used for fun. And people would come on there and make videos that were, about things that they enjoyed. And I happen to enjoy very girly things. And so I talked about that on the internet. And what I realized in doing that, that was a couple of years in, the term influencer really started to become a thing, and brands and companies wanted to work with these regular people on the internet to talk about their products. And I realized, I can actually make money and make a living and do something that I like and talk about things that I really enjoy on this thing called the internet, and people will pay me to do that. And so I started to become, the beginnings of what I get to do now, which is just be an influencer. And I talked about, things that I enjoyed, and I work with different brands and different companies. In doing that, I think there was a shift in learning that, hey, I can actually, sustain myself with everything that I am. I think that growing my online audience and seeing how people were responding just to me as a person was really fun. And so I started a business where I would help other people kind of do the same thing, because people started asking, how can I do that for myself? How can I, use YouTube or social media to share the things that I like and become a personal brand. And so that was back in 2016 when I started my coaching business. And that's really kind of how it all fell into place. It was like having this ongoing conversation with God and saying like, God, like, I feel like this is something, I feel like there's something here, just kind of continue to help me and to order those steps. And that's really how I ended up where I am today. And it's really just on the heels of doing things that I enjoyed and then watching those turn into things that would become much larger than I ever thought possible.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I sort of did the same thing as you. I followed the traditional path of, going to college, getting the degree, working in corporate America before I finally got tired of that and decided that I could have a greater impact if I took the skill sets that I developed and move into a different space. But when you think about that, when you look back on, sort of your traditional upbringing, going to college, working in corporate America, doing ministry and nonprofit work, sort of what are the two sides of the coin? What are the positives and the negatives? What are the things that you think in that background really helped you get to where you are? And if so, are there any things that you think held you back from getting into that entrepreneurial space?
Yeah. So I think what helped me, right, is everything that I learned in business, everything that I learned in terms of leadership, because I had positions in both in corporate or in ministry and in nonprofit that really allowed me to hone my leadership skills. And I always say, like, those are things that I've taken with me, things that I learned, at 22, 23, 25, 26, in the context of community and in the context of building community, even. Those are things that I took with me into my business. And I'm always so thankful for that. And I still use very, very much, and now it's really cool because I get to kind of play on both. So what I learned, let's say in nonprofit and in the ministry world in terms of building community, I get to use on the internet in terms of building community and the grand scale of it all, and the visibility piece I get to use in my work with my church. And then as far as like business, like that gets to commingle in how, I serve as the one on the executive team at my church. So I'm getting a chance to use all of that in tandem with what I'm learning on a regular basis. It all really does go together. I think I'm really surprised by kind of how these puzzle pieces that didn't seem to make sense at the time really make sense in the now. Like, I'm like, oh, this makes sense. Even if I was in different positions that weren't longstanding or weren't positions that I was meant to be in, for decades and decades, I learned what I needed to learn. I made sure to pay attention, not even knowing how I would use it. And now I get to use it. In terms of what held me back into entering into the entrepreneurial space is it's really just, ambition is predicated on exposure, I always say. And there just wasn't a lot of exposure to entrepreneurship when I was growing up. It just wasn't a thing. People didn't talk about it. Even going to business school in college, the entrepreneurship program wasn't really something that was highlighted or that people wanted to enter into, because entrepreneurship sounded like sales. It sounded like sales, or I had to invent something. And I didn't feel like that was anything that was in my particular skill set. So I didn't know that it was a possibility until I did. Right. And really, I'm so thankful at the timeline, because if I would have been told when I was, 25 that I would be here, I think I probably would have freaked out, and I would have been like, no, I won't. Like, I really thought in college that I would go off and do something really big in corporate America. And of course, that's not how that worked out. But I'm so thankful for each season, because I do think that they compound into, the skill set that I get to use today.
Yeah, I agree. And I had sort of the same experience, between going to school and working in business. I think it equipped me with a very solid set of skills to know how to run a business and, and in leadership and things like that. But one of the things that I found, and I don't know if this resonates with you or not, is that the things that tended to hold me back is working in corporate America. There is a system for doing everything. And so it's sort of like, this is how we do things. And one of my favorite movies is The Matrix. And in there, the is sort of the seed of greatness, I think, for entrepreneurs. And that's where Morpheus is teaching Neo, and he's evaluating his skills. And he says, one of the things that you need to understand is that in the real world, there are some rules that can be bent and there are some that can be broken.
Yes.
And it's learning, I think, to have that entrepreneurial spirit, to not And it is a skill, I think, that you have to develop, is to just look at things and say, just because that's the way it's always been isn't the way that it always needs to be. We can
Right.
change, we can bend those rules, we can break
Yeah.
those rules, we can create new ones that will help us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that there is this element of, wanting to break things down to build them back up, and the ability to do that and see an outcome that doesn't yet exist is part and parcel with being an entrepreneur, right? Because the truth of the matter is that as an entrepreneur, you don't know if anything's going to work. You're kind of just showing up, assuming that it will, and along the way, getting a chance to create what you believe is the right thing in the moment. And that's difficult for people. I think you're right, when they're not used to that level of autonomy, that you actually can bend the rules and you can change things up, and it doesn't have to look the same way. You can have an outcome or a goal of the same thing twice over, and the way to get there, you can have like 19 different journeys that will allow for it. And I think that being an entrepreneur opens up your mind to the ability, or to the possibility, that you don't have to think one way. There's not one cookie cutter way of doing it. There's not one cookie cutter way of being successful. There are many different options, and you can explore whatever feels the most aligned to you.
Yeah, and I think it really begins with that mindset that says, it's not a matter of if it can be done, it's a matter of how do I do it.
Yes.
And learning to think that way. And that was one of the things. I trained classically as an engineer. And so, I always looked at things from the standpoint of, there is a solution to every problem. It's not if it can be solved, it's how do I go about doing it? Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about too, and you've mentioned this about, being involved in ministry work and being a part of your church, in the work that you do and in the coaching that you do as you help your clients, how does your faith inform the things that you do?
That's such a good question. And I love that question, because I think that it really allows for people in this space, at least the people who do the kind of work that we do, where we're really involved and integrated with our clients on a personal level. It's just a level of authenticity that I get to bring to the table. I think that when people work with me, they sort of already know what they're going to get, right? It's like, so there's not a surprise when I, bring things up about God, or if I talk about different biblical principles in the context of business. It's not surprising for people, because that's who I am. That's how, that's how I show face on the internet. That's how I show up. It's the things that I talk about. It's in the language that I use. And so I've never felt like I've had to hide it, or that I've had to dumb it down, or put it in its own like separate container. Like, this is the ministry work that I do, and then this is the business that I get to have. Like, I think that they all work together. My life is a ministry. I've always said that. Even before I knew what I would be doing with my life, I always had that ideology. And now I get to see that in true form. And it's so fun, because there have been so many instances where people will come to me specifically because that is my background, right? Like, they will come specifically because I am a faith-based coach, even though I don't market myself as like, I'm a coach for faith-based people. Like, it's not how I market, but it's because it's in the language that I use, or in how I conduct myself. And I always think that, just the Holy Spirit in general has a way of letting people know. But other than that, I think it's a level of authenticity that I'm so glad I get to operate in. And I think that everybody should operate in who they truly are, what aligns with them, because that's going to resonate with people that are looking for the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I do the same thing. I mean, I don't say that I'm a faith-based coach. I work with everybody. But I also am very upfront in telling people that, that all of the teaching and all of the instruction that I do is based on the Bible,
Right.
and it's based on that core belief system. And I think that you're right. I think that God leads people to us. He leads people to us who need the message that we have to share. But I agree that having that transparency, having that authenticity in the way you show up, and what it does is it builds trust, it builds credibility, and people know that if you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it, because that's the way you are, and that comes from your internal belief system. And I think that's really, really powerful. One of the things I love about you, Tracy, is that you said that your mission is to live your life in such a way that shows others what's possible for them. How do you do that? And how does that come across practically in the work that you do?
Oh, such a great question. I think that people sometimes are not aware of possibility. We have a lot of desires. I believe that even the desires that we have are God-given to a degree. And sometimes we find ourselves not following through with those or not exploring what that can look like because we're afraid or because we don't think that it's something that is available to us. And so when I say that my mission in life is to live my life in a way that shows people what's possible for theirs, is I'm literally just a girl who decided to follow through on things I wanted to do, and then like allowed for, you know, the spiritual team to kind of be the guiding force. So I'm always like, okay, God, here's where I feel like you're calling me to go. So I'm just gonna assume that this is the direction, and we're gonna rock with it. But I think it gives other people permission to shine in their own way. There are so many conversations that I've had in airports or at a gym or at Target or wherever, where people will say, well, what do you do? And I explain it. And usually it'll come in the form of like, well, you know, here's how it happened, or, you know, I'll kind of explain it. And then they'll say, oh, I've always wanted to do that too. And if I ask them what they're doing now, they'll say, oh, I'm this profession or that profession, but I've always wanted to, right? So it almost opens up their mind to the possibility that there is something else. And I get that because I've been there. I've been in a place where I'm like, I know that there's something. I know that God is calling me to something else. I don't know what that is quite yet, but I know that there's something. And if I can just follow the steps, follow the order. Like, I didn't know the entire big picture. I still don't know the entire big picture. Not really my job. I would say that's not my job. Like, God can kind of fill in the gaps. God's grace fills in the gaps there. My job is really just to steward the opportunity and the ideas and the vision that I have today. That changes on a very regular basis. Believe me, God's always doing a new thing in my life. But you know, my job is really just to show up for today. And if I can show up for today, then I guarantee you God's going to give me the next step and the next step and the next step, because he's been so faithful to do that all along the way.
Yeah. And I think that's a powerful thing, is that so much of the time people are looking for, especially in coaches, they want somebody who will help them map out a plan for their lives. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've often said, you know, is that in very, very few instances, you know, has God ever showed anybody the entire road? And I think there's a reason for that, because if he showed me exactly where my life is going and what the end of the road looks like, I'm going to sit back and in my own humanness, I'm going to say, well, nope. What do I need you for?
Right.
You know, I already know the end of the road, but he comes and he says, here's the first step that I want you to take. And after you've taken that step, I'll show you what's next. Mm-hmm. And the reason he's doing that is he's saying, I want you to put your faith and trust in me.
Correct.
And when you do that, it'll happen. You know?
Yeah, it's way better. I always say it's way better. Like, I have no desire to figure it all out on my own. Like, I have no desire to map out my life's plan. I don't want to, you know, figure out all the different nuances. Like, it just sounds exhausting to try and do that. So let me just work on what I'm supposed to do right here. And what I always tell people is, like, you know, what seems to you like this giant step of faith that I had to take to get to where I am was not a giant step of faith. It's just a series of baby steps that I'm taking along the way. Sometimes it's a little easier than others, but there's no giant leap of faith here. There's really just small but steady, consistently walks, like a walk with God along the way. But it's definitely not anything. I would not categorize it as a giant leap of faith. I would categorize them as many baby steps that led me to where I am.
Yeah, and I think that's really true. And that's one of the things that I teach my clients is when it comes to goal setting. As an example, I teach them to, you know, take a goal that may be a year or 2 years out there and break it down into the baby steps, so that, you know, when you wake up tomorrow morning, what is it that I have to do today?
Right. Today.
You know, and then take that little baby step. And I think in doing that, you know, we break things down to a point. So number one, we have a focus. We know what we need to do. And the other thing is that when you're taking a baby step, you know, that baby step for today may be to send an email, to make a phone call or something like that. But it's something that almost seems insignificant because it's so small. And yet when you do that day after day, week after week, month after month, you know, when you look to 6 months out and you look back, you think, my goodness, how far have I come? How much have I achieved in that time? And yet it doesn't really stress you out.
Right.
And it doesn't freak you out because you've taken that big goal and you've boiled it down. And I think maybe that's what God is trying to teach us to do, is to take the baby steps, because the baby steps are things that you can handle. If I gave you the big picture, you would say, no, I can never do that.
Right.
And
all of us
yeah.
Right.
So in that light, in the coaching that you do,
Mm-hmm.
do you struggle, or do you have clients who struggle a lot with limiting beliefs that are holding them back?
Yes. So in the work that I've done as a coach, what I've found is that the strategy part, laying it out, the strategies are often transferable. They're tried and true. Like, people are using the same strategies. There's not much, other than putting your own little special sauce on something. There's not really much that we have to do with regards to strategy. We don't need to reinvent wheels, so to speak. What I'm finding is that even when the strategy is laid out for people, what they wrestle with the most is their own limiting beliefs to be able to accomplish them. So most of the work that I do really is in the mindset piece when it comes to building a business. If you have somebody who has traditionally been an employee, trying to get them from being an employee to an entrepreneur, well, that's a completely different identity, right? We're now adopting entirely new identities of self, because if you've only ever known yourself to have a boss, moving into the space of being your own boss, completely different identity. And so we have to break down a lot of those limiting beliefs that says, I can't, I'm an imposter, I won't, I'm a fraud, I'm a perfectionist, like all of those things that really are sabotaging us along the way to success. Those have to kind of be broken down so that we can build ourselves back up again to have a whole new self-concept in this new space.
Yeah, I agree with that 1,000%. One of the things that I take people through is to, in the development of their purpose and where they're trying to go in life, is that, we examine, here's where you are,
mm-hmm.
here's where you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
What are the gaps in between that need to be filled? And most of the time, people are looking at those gaps and they're trying to define the gaps in terms of what are the skill sets that I need to develop. And I say, the skill sets is only 20%.
Right.
80% of it is, who do you have to become as a person in order to be able to achieve that purpose? It's really about who you need to become and not the skill sets that you need to acquire. And sometimes people really, really struggle with that. The other thing I run into is, and I think it sort of plays into the whole belief system and the limiting beliefs, is that there has to be a congruence between what you're trying to accomplish and what you believe as a person. Because if not, and it's a silly example, I guess, but I say, hey, let's say that one of your purposes in life is to make a lot of money because you want to be very philanthropic, you want to give a lot of stuff away. But if you have a belief system that says money is the root of all evil, what are the chances that you're going to be able to achieve that? Because you're going to be internally constantly butting heads with yourself, and you're going to waste a lot of energy in the attempt of achieving that purpose. And so a lot of what I do is, and I'm sure you do too, is the mindset issue of getting your beliefs and your purpose aligned, understanding what those limiting beliefs are, and eliminating or changing those beliefs into something that really serves you.
Right. And here's how I explain that to people, because that's so common. The Bible talks about, where two or more agree, it will be done. And I'm like, sometimes we can't even agree with ourselves. We're saying one thing and we believe something completely different. We are now operating in a very conflicted body. And that conflicted body, that's like, you're not moving in the direction with yourself. Like, you're going to fight yourself. And so there's all these limiting beliefs that really are self-sabotaging your success. And the work is to kind of bring those beliefs into consciousness so that you even know what they are. Because most of the time people have them running as programs in the background and they're completely unaware that it is a conflicting belief. Like, you can want to be wealthy. You can, affirm all day, I am wealthy, I am a millionaire, whatever the case is. But if there are those subconscious beliefs that are operating in the background, sabotaging you, like the one that you mentioned, where money is the root of all evil, you're not going to betray yourself, even if it is in favor of what it is you say that you want.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that people don't take the time to do those deep internal dives to discover who they really are as people. And that's one of the things. I'll tell you a quick story. Back in 2006, I was in Kazakhstan. And I was teaching at a university over there. And one of the classes I taught was an undergraduate class in strategic planning. And the students came into class and they thought that, we were going to spend the semester together developing this strategic plan for a multinational, multi-billion-dollar company. And the first assignment that I gave was to go home and write a personal purpose or a personal mission statement. And there was one young woman sitting in the front of the room and she said, I don't understand. Why do you want us to do that? And I said, because if you can't write a mission statement for a corporation of one, that being you, you have no credibility to do it for a multinational corporation that's going to affect the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. And when they came back in, these kids had come, was not too long after the Iron Curtain was down and the Soviet influence was still there. And most of these kids came from pretty humble backgrounds. And so their initial pass at their mission statements was, I want to have a big home. I want to drive fancy cars. I want a boat on the Mediterranean. I want to be able to travel the world. And so when I started seeing some of that stuff bubble up, I said, guys, I think we need to take a little deeper dive here. And I took them through an exercise of saying, imagine what you're going to look like at 90 years old. And then imagine what you're going to feel like when you're 90 years old. And sort of get that, get it to a point where you can see it and feel it in your body. And then imagine yourself at that point of not being 90 years old. You're terminally ill. You haven't been out of your own bed in 3 months. And the doctor has just left your bedside and told you that you have less than 24 hours to live. As you lay there waiting to die and you look back across your life, what's it really going to count for? Ask yourself questions like, hey, what are the things that I've accomplished in life that I'm most proud of? What are the things that I've done in life that I'm absolutely ashamed of? What are the relationships that I've had? And how have I treated those relationships? And so when you begin to ask yourself those kinds of questions, you really begin to discover the threads of who you really want to be as a person. And we can take those threads and we can weave those threads into the tapestry that will be the rest of your life. And when I did that, when I sent them off to do that exercise, the transformation was amazing because all of a sudden they started realizing that it's not about money and things, it's about people and relationships. And that to me is what this guiding process of being a coach is all about, is to make people help people to find and not tell them what they need to do, but be that guiding light, if you will, that helps them discover what's really important to you in life. And when it's all said and done, what do you want to be? Exactly.
And I think that most people, when it comes to living life or living out the entirety of life and living the fullness of life, most people really just don't give themselves the time and the space to explore that possibility of what it truly looks like to step fully into their purpose, to step fully into, what they're called to do. And looking at it from that perspective, like really allowing yourself to be that 90-year-old, I think is genius on your part to be able to offer that up, because people just, again, we've never been taught that. If we were, maybe the world would be different. If everybody was taught that, in the 9th grade or something, maybe, just maybe, things would be a little bit different. People would follow their true passions. They'd follow what they feel like they're called to do. They would step into a version of themselves that they didn't even know was possible, simply because they focused on the right things.
Yeah, it's really true. And I think there's another word that comes into play here, and that is that not only do we not take the time to look deeply into ourselves, but we don't give ourselves the grace to really probe and to believe. And I think a lot of that has to do is that we don't see ourselves the way God sees us.
Not at all.
I was talking to someone the other day, and she was saying that, I really don't like myself. I don't feel positive about myself. And I said, yeah, but if Jesus were standing here today, what do you think he would have to say?
Right.
He would look at you and he would say, I got tons of positive things to say about you. You're my child. I love you. I'm happy with you. Are you perfect? No. And you never will be. but
Right.
that doesn't have anything to do with, with whether I love you or whether whether I'm gracious toward you or not.
Right.
And I think that is so powerful. If we will give ourselves the grace to be human and to realize that, that despite our shortcomings, we can accomplish amazing things in life.
I know. And people don't give themselves the time to do that. And they don't allow themselves to see themselves as God sees them. And in doing that, they're not able to get themselves to a place of truth with a capital T, right? I think sometimes we believe in the lies that we're told. We believe that we're not good enough. We believe in, some of that, that negative self-talk that we are so conditioned to do, that we don't give ourselves the grace or the time or the space to really say, okay, how does God see me? And then how can I get myself to see myself in that same space, right? And that relationship with God, I think, is so important, because if your theology says that God is withholding from you, or God hates you if you're not perfect, or like if that's your theology, then you're going to operate a lot differently than someone who believes that God loves them unconditionally, right? That God is there for them and God desires for them to flourish in this human experience and to do good work. Like, it's a completely different life experience when you believe those two things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of that, and you alluded to this before, is that we have this constant internal self-talk that is going on. And a lot of it relates to the quality of the questions that we learn to ask ourselves. It's I forget who it was that said it, but one of the speakers I heard one time was talking about it. And he said, you know what? He said, all of us screw up. But he said, when we screw up, he said, if you go and stand in front of the mirror and you ask yourself a question like, how could I have been so stupid? He said, guess what? Your mind can come up with all sorts of reasons why you're stupid.
Yeah.
But he said, if you look at yourself and learn to ask better quality questions and say things like, what can I learn from this experience? What is God trying to teach me through this experience? All of a sudden, you begin to get positive answers about, this is what you're supposed to learn. And if you really learn something from it, is it really a failure, or is it just a learning experience?
Right. And so many people are afraid of failure. And what I was telling my clients the other day, as I said, most people aren't actually afraid of failure, because if you figure it out and you get to a place of failing, you realize, you're not going to die. You just kind of didn't do something that you thought. Most people aren't afraid of failure. They're actually afraid of the feeling that comes with failure. They're afraid of the judgment. They're afraid of feeling like they're not good enough. All that comes from negative self-talk. None of us are actually afraid of failure. Failure is kind of a part of life. When you're a kid and you learn how to walk, you're going to have to fall down a few times. And as a baby, no one's out there thinking that, I fell down once, I'm never doing it again, I'm a failure, and I'm going to crawl for the rest of my life. That's not what a toddler is thinking. They just get right back up, because they don't have the same fears that somehow we as adults have adopted and we have decided to put onto ourselves. So instead of saying that you're afraid of failure, I think that that's true. If you recognize that there's actually an alternative to feeling like you're judged, or feeling like something is that you are a person who doesn't know how to do things right, just learn the lesson and then try again. Learn the lesson, try again.
Exactly. And that is so powerful. I was thinking about that because I have 4 little granddaughters, and to watch them is just amazing, because, they absolutely nothing is impossible to them.
Right.
And they will pick up a toy and they will just start inventing stories.
Yep.
Yeah. And they have this massive creativity in them that says anything in the world is possible. And then I sit back and I say, gee, what is it that happens to us? Because by the time we're teenagers, we don't think that way anymore.
Not at all.
And yet that is not only where success is found, but that's the spice of life. That's what really energizes us, is when we give ourselves permission to dream again, and then realize that, that with God as our partner, we have the ability to make those dreams come true.
And it's so fun. It's so much more fun to do it that way.
It really is. It really is. It's a blast. Well, Tracy, I thank you for taking the time today to chat. Tell our audience where they can connect with you, so that people can get aligned with you, because I know that you add so much value to your world.
Well, thank you so much. And I really appreciate being here. And this conversation is so life-giving in so many ways. So thank you for that. If anybody wants to contact or wants to connect, then you can just find me on social media. I'm Tracy Timberlake everywhere. So on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on YouTube, Tracy Timberlake is where you can find me.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you again for today. God bless you. And we will stay connected and hopefully do another one of these.
Yes.
Thanks so much for taking the time to be with me today. If you found this video to be insightful, if you got some little nugget of gold that you can take and put to work in your life right away, will you please hit the like button and also take a moment to share in the comments what you learned from this video today, what you found valuable. Also, if this kind of content resonates with you, if you're interested in learning more about how to live a happy, successful, fulfilled life, hit subscribe, and that way you'll be notified anytime we publish new content. Thank you so much. God bless you. I'll see you in the next video.